talking about this. You're getting some papers that I'm handing out that you can follow along with that hopefully will be really helpful to you. I'm not going to have time to go through some of this information, so let me just tell you a couple of quick things. One of the papers that I've given you is what ought to go into a 3-day emergency kit. So you can take that home and kind of use that for your information. But one thing I want to mention, can you hear me? Okay, good. One thing I want to mention is don't ever think of this as just 3 days, because if you look at the disasters around the world, most help is not there within 3 days. You need to have at least a good 2 weeks. If you follow something like this as a guideline and then add things to it. Now, one of the things when they asked me what I wanted to talk about, I had given them a list of things that I wanted to do, and one of the things I said was I wanted to talk about how to do some of your food and water so that you don't make mistakes. If you've got limited funds, you can't afford to be making a lot of mistakes. Nobody really can anyway. So I want to go into that a bit. And any questions that you've got, please feel free to ask. This page comes out of the back of the Cookin with Home Storage cookbook. And we'll go along with some of the information in there, so you'll have that to refer to. Now, just so that I know my audience a little bit, can you raise your hands? Are you just getting started with your food storage, with preparedness? No? How many of you have been doing it for a while? Okay. Some of you, okay. You're very fortunate if you have, because you know if you've been doing it for a while, that you can spend years and years and years and a lot of money and still not feel like you're ever done, huh? Because you're not, generally. If you are just getting started, one of the things that I would really suggest to you is that you make a good plan. And don't ever think that preparedness is just food and water storage, because it is so much more than that. One of the best books that's come out just recently that I can suggest to you, and I like to pass on ideas because for 25 years I've been involved in preparedness, and I've helped thousands of families get prepared. And so I've collected over the years the very best of what there is out there. And I will try to pass along some of these tips to you because it will save you so much time and effort and mistakes, because you can buy a lot of things that aren't going to be that good. But this is one book, it's called From Band-Aids to Self-Sufficiency, that will help you a lot in doing an overall preparedness plan. In it, it's written by Win Westmoreland, and he goes into all the different facets of preparedness. Everything that you need to be thinking about is listed in there. And he does it in an incremental way. Here's what you would do, what needs to go into an emergency pack for a car, what you'd add for 3 days, and then so on up. It's got everything in there you can imagine. You can look through that. I don't have a lot of time to spend on any one thing, or I'd go into a lot more detail on a lot of this. But what you want to do is go through and figure out what it is you need to get. One of the things that is particularly important, the number one thing, is shelter. A good tent. Again, it depends on what level you're looking at. A lot of people, I talk to people all the time, all over, and a lot of people will say that they're just thinking of it for a short term, something they don't expect it to be very bad. Then there are some of us who expect it to be very bad. You know, we know that this isn't going to be just a short-term thing, that life will really be changing for people in the United States, in the world, over as time goes on. And so we need to be looking at what we can do to sustain ourselves for a length of time. And so you've got to determine, do you think you're going to be able to stay in your home? Do you think that you're going to have to pick up and go off somewhere? What will you take if you have to go quickly? Think through all of those things, and you determine for yourself how you feel about it. But depending on what you think is going to very much determine what types of things you store and to what level, what degree of preparedness you do. Now, since quite a few of you have been doing this for a while, that is absolutely excellent. But I want to talk for a minute to those that are just getting started. You know, it's very, very, very rare that people have the money where they can go out and just buy everything that they want for preparedness all at once. In the 25 years that I've done this, I've met 2 people who've been able to do that. One was a doctor, and one is a lawyer that I'm working with in Louisiana right now who can just do whatever he wants to do, and it's so amazing. But most of us can't do that, and we cannot afford to be making mistakes and buying things that aren't going to work that later we decide we have to replace what we've just bought. So, a few tips that I want to give you. If you are just getting started, or if you're wanting to add to things and you want the most for your money, and I'm going to be talking mostly about food and water storage because that's what I've really addressed for so many years. The best thing you can do is get a lot of grains and a lot of beans because you get a lot for your money. You can feed a lot of people for not very much money. Now, somebody was just by my booth earlier this morning, and they looked at something and they said, I hope this dispels that awful, awful myth that if you store your wheat and oil and powdered milk and salt, you're ready. And he was so right when he said that, because people who do that are going to be in for a real big shock, and that is the biggest mistake they could possibly do. You know, BYU did a study quite a few years ago, and they found that 85% of the people that tried to live on that diet would not survive because it's just too harsh. A lot of people nowadays can't tolerate wheat. They're celiac. Children have a hard time eating wheat for long, long periods of time because it's just too harsh on their system. So you want to make sure, and if you look at the list, you want to make sure that you get a really good variety in what you are storing there. Now, years ago, a lady wrote a book. It's not available anymore, but it was such an interesting thing that she had in the beginning, and maybe some of you have seen it. But she had those things listed. If you've stored these things, here's what you can do with it. She listed those 4 items. There were about 4 things that you could do. What can you do with that? You can eat cereal. Well, yeah, you could eat cereal and a couple of other things. There's not much you can do. If you have based a lot of your preparedness, and I'm going to talk about this more in detail, that you need to do more than that. But it is a good way to begin if you're just getting started and don't have a lot of money. But you've got to make sure that you have added other things. Make sure you get a good variety of grains because you're going to be able to do a lot more with it. And it's so important that you are able to have different textures, different flavors, those types of things. If you will add just a few things to that, it totally opens up a lot that you can do with that. Make sure that the 4 flavorings that are the most important, that you're going to use the most, are going to be your bouillon, your onions, cheese, and tomato. If you have those things, suddenly there's a lot you can do with it. And then spices. Make sure you've stored some spices. There's a couple of other things you need to make sure that you do, and that is baking powder and baking soda. You know, when I first did this book, the Cookin with Home Storage Cookbook, it struck me. I was sitting in a meeting one day down in Manti. It was a historical meeting, and it had been hitting me for a long time that there was not a good cookbook out there that dealt with how to use your food storage. And people would get it, but they didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, there's just got to be one that gets done, because there are too many people that are going to be in a lot of trouble if they don't have some helps that way. So I was sitting in that meeting, and it hit me to go in and look at it from a historical perspective and put a lot of information on how the pioneers did things in there. And one of the things we did was we went back and we found a lot of old pioneer recipes They are worth their weight in gold because they take very, very, very few ingredients. But if you go in here, and at the beginning of each section are the recipes, the old pioneer recipes. You go into the bread section, you look at that. Even that, you have to have baking powder or baking soda. There's only one recipe in there that doesn't require it. So baking powder, baking soda, yeast. If you don't have yeast, you can always do something like sourdough. Get a starter, or in the book, there's a recipe for making sourdough starter. But if you have those things, it opens up all kinds of possibilities. One of the things that you've got to make sure that you do, though, is have a really good grain mill. One of the biggest mistakes, well, I've seen a lot of mistakes over the past 25 years, but one of the things that I have seen happen over and over and over again is people buy a really inexpensive little grain mill. I mean, I have seen almost every person I know has done that. They will spend between $50 and $80 on, I won't mention any brand names there, but they get the little mill because they think, well, I need to conserve money for something else, and so I'll conserve it here. This will do me. Only to find out, those who have actually tried using it, that they don't hold up. And you can spend 20 minutes getting a cup of flour with those. But I have had dozens and dozens of people call me and say, mine, I have never sold them for that reason, because they don't hold up. And you have to have a mill. I had a lady call me a year ago. I thought this was the funniest story on this. She called and she said she had bought one of those and it had lasted 2 weeks, and so she had taken it back to where she bought it. And they said, well, I'm sorry, but that is really about as long as they last. You better hope that if you're in a situation, it's only going to last for 2 weeks. And she said, I thought I was going to have to buy a dozen of them because... And then I found out about this other grain mill, and she said, that's the one I've got to get. Well, guess what? She would have spent as much buying her dozen of these. She would have spent more on those that would have been an absolute pain to use as buying a good one that will last a lifetime. So that's one thing. They are expensive, but get a good grain mill. If you want some suggestions, come over to my booth. I'll show you what I have found through the years to be absolutely wonderful. And there are some others out here too that are really good. But you've got to have a good one. So if you want to save some money, do it right from the beginning. It took me a couple of years to save up before I finally got mine, but it was a big relief when I did. Now, I want to step back for a minute from talking about food and talk about water for just a minute, because that, when I have gone to expos in the past all over the country, that's always been the number one question that I get asked, is how to do your water and what I would recommend. For one thing, during Y2K, I was so surprised how many calls I got from all around the country, people telling me they wanted to store a year's supply of water. Well, that's going to be impossible. Can you imagine how much room that would take to store a year? They did a study up in Portland, Oregon, probably about 30 years ago, to see how much water families used in a day. Guess what they found? 360 gallons of water a day was the average for a family. Of course, that included washing clothes, washing dishes, taking baths, cooking, drinking, all of that. What they recommend in an emergency situation is that you store 14 gallons of water for 2 weeks. That is very minimal. Compare that. That's per person. Compare 360 gallons of water a day to 1 gallon of water a day. You can tell how minimal that would be. That would be merely enough to drink and to have a little bit for sanitation. So you want to store as much as you feasibly can. Now, there's a lot of people that call me and they say, I don't really feel that I need to store water because I have a well. But even they make a mistake if they don't. Because if there was an earthquake or something and it shifts the ground, you never know. What if there was a nuclear attack and you had to be in your home and couldn't get out to where there were other resources. You need to make sure you have stored some water. The best way to do it are in those 55-gallon drums as far as bulk water. The cheapest way to do that is to get used ones. But if you're going to get used ones, you've got to absolutely make sure that it's going to be safe to drink the water that was in there. It's got to be something that isn't going to leach, because whatever water you put in there, it's going to take on the flavor of whatever it is that's been stored in there, because it's leached into the plastic and it's going to release back out into your water. So if you're going to use pickle containers, that wouldn't be too bad. Some of the really good ones would be to go to an ice cream place and get some of their syrup ones. Imagine how good those would taste. Lemon ones, those are really, really good. But stay away from things that don't have food-grade stuff in it, because it'll be poison to you, so don't do that. Some of the other containers, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to be really fast because there's so much to try to cover. We can't even begin to in this. But your 2 and 3 liter pop bottles are very, very good. And the only problem is they take up a lot of space. So your gallon jugs of, like that you get cider in and things, those are excellent. Again, they take up a lot of space. So do what you can do. One thing that you should make sure is that you have a couple of 5 or 10 gallon portable ones, so that if there was an earthquake or something and your water was cut off and you had to go to a source, you could take your wagon or wheelbarrow or something and go and come with those, and you know, so that you could keep yourselves going. Now, the best thing I have found for storing your water is what is called ion. This is a stabilized oxygen. In the cookbook, there is a page in here that tells you how to store your water and how much bleach or how much iodine you put in per gallon. Those are good and effective at killing bacteria and viruses, but they do have health effects. So I was thrilled when 20 years ago I found this. It's totally natural, but it also has tons of medicinal uses. It gets more oxygen into your system. This is one thing I would not be without. I have used this for so many different things. I got food poisoning in a restaurant one time, and I cleared it up in 2 hours using this. In South America, I got food poisoning once, and I know I was flat in bed for several days. So I've just used this on so many different things. It's just amazing. It's one of the most valuable things you can get in your storage. One ought to go in every emergency pack. Yes, it's called ION, I-O-N. One of these will do 2 55-gallon barrels. If you put it in your emergency packs, make sure you put it in a Ziploc bag, because if it does leak, it acts like bleach. It will bleach stuff out. It doesn't have any of the negative properties of bleach, but it does act like that. So, oh boy, I wish I could tell you some of the stories. If you have time and want to know, come over to my booth after. I would love to share some of the things that so many people have called me and told me they've used this for and their experiences. I've got some really funny stories. I've got to share one with you, even though we don't have a lot of time. I've got to tell you this one because it was too funny. I had a customer one time who called me and said, I have cleared up all, she loved animals, and she said, I've cleared up all the cat's eyes in my neighborhood. You know, they get the goopy eyes by using the ion. And she treated all these animals using it. And so I had this little kitten one time, and it had goopy eyes, and I thought, I'm going to try it. Me, of all people, should have known better, but without thinking, I dropped it in its eyes. You're not supposed to put it in eyes and ears. If you do, you better dilute it down. I didn't. And the poor little kitten, within 2 hours, its eyes looked like golf balls. I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done to this cat? I felt so bad. But it was pulling out all of the toxins. By the time the next morning the swelling had gone down, its eyes were cleared up, and it was perfectly fine, but it scared me to death. So you do need to know what you're doing. Even if you do know, you need to think about what you're doing. Okay, so how often do you rotate your water? your water goes flat after a while. Some of the things you can do to improve it is pour it back and forth, to aerate it, or whip it, or do whatever to make it taste a little better. You may want to get some flavoring just to put a little bit in, especially if you have children, because it doesn't taste all that good. But you can store water. You could store it for a long time. It would go flat. But what does happen if you're storing it in plastic, and most of us do, is the plastic, the polyphenol chlorides, leach out into the water. And that is what it is that you have got to pour your water out and refill it up. Okay, and you can do that every 6 months to 2 years. I generally don't get mine done till about 2 years, but you should periodically change your water. Now, since you cannot store enough water to last for a whole year or however long you're going to do it, you have got to have a good filter. One of the things that you can do if you don't have one is boil water, but sometimes it's not safe to do it, and sometimes you can't afford to lose the water to evaporation, and it is way better to have a filter. Look at every emergency. I used to use examples when I spoke all the time of Rwanda, the tens of thousands of people that got cholera and dysentery in their camps. But just look at Haiti right now. They have got that outbreak of cholera over there. And it's because sanitation breaks down and water becomes contaminated. You have to be able to filter it. Most of us, even now, way prefer to filter our water than drink the chlorine that's in our water or the fluoride and all of the stuff that is in there. I live down in Manti, and we have had cholera. We have not. We have not. But we have had Giardia, and we have had E. coli in our water. And so just as a matter of course, in those little towns especially, you don't know what your water quality is. When they get a break in the water, they go up and they just dump several bags of chlorine in the water. And, you know, so I always treat my water. But the very, 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 very best thing I have found through the years are the Berkefeld water filters. They are outstanding. They are so good that they're actually considered purification elements. One filter will filter 2,000 to 3,000 gallons of water before it has to be replaced. So it becomes extremely economical. The Berkey water filters. Yeah, I've got them over there too. You can come over and see the different sizes. And actually, that's not Berkey. It's a distributor that's here. But they are, bar none, the best water filter out there. So I can save you a bit of work on that, of trying to figure them out. I've done a lot of radio talk shows through the years, and every time I have done them, I have had people with other filters call up to retrofit to Berkey's. So that's one way that you can save yourself some money. Again, do it right from the very beginning. Now, if you have questions as we go along, by all means, please ask me. Let's go through this for just a minute. I'm not going to take all the time, but you see the beans and grains, and a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. You can get it. One of the things that I found so interesting when I was working on the cookbook is going back and doing the history of the pioneers. We did it from the Manti perspective, and when they got down there that winter, all they had were their grains and beans. They had coffee grinders that they ground it with. They did have some cattle and things, but they didn't fare all that well. By the time spring came, they went out in the fields and they started gathering herbs that were growing wild and started eating those, and things really, really improved. Then they could grow their gardens and things. So that tells us something. If you look at what they have done, you've got to make sure you store some of this in your food storage. You need to have some of these things. Sprouts are an excellent thing to have in there. You can sprout all of your grains and beans. Did you know that? All of them are very edible and very good. So all of those are sproutable, but it's really good to get some regular sprouts too and keep that going. Or there are a lot of companies out there that sell dehydrated foods and freeze-dried foods. Let me tell you the difference between them because this will help you. If you're just getting started with your food storage, you're going to have to pace yourself and figure out what you want to do. If you've been going for a while, if you can invest in some freeze-dried foods, they are absolutely wonderful. But they are a little more expensive. The nutrition is a little bit higher in them, and they only require adding water. You don't have to cook them. That can be extremely important because if you are in a situation where you really can't cook, you're going to have to be able to do some, have some things that don't require cooking. Think of it now, those of you that cook. There are days when you are so busy or you don't feel well where you really can't cook a big meal, can you? Or take the time to do it. You have to do something really quick or go grab something really fast, order a pizza, or do something. That's not going to change in these situations. So there are some good things, like the Mix-A-Meal cookbook. That's a great one, where you can pick things up, do it ahead of time, and then just add water. That's quick and easy. Some of the other good things, canned chili, canned soup, those types of things. Your MREs are good, but don't go real heavy in MREs because you're going to wish that you hadn't. The freeze-dried is one of the best things. I see somebody down there is laughing. He's a Desert Storm veteran. I bet you have a story behind that. You'd agree with me. Don't go too heavy with MREs. Yes, he's agreeing. The best thing I have found are your freeze-dried main dishes. Now, there are different freeze-dried foods out there. Some of them have a lot of chemicals and preservatives in them, a lot of hydrogenated oil, those types of things. There are some that are much more pure with what they do. I do have some information, something that I put together that have helped people over the years. They've loved getting this. It's a 1-month supply for lunch and dinner of main dishes. If you could even have just some of this in your food storage, it is going to be a lifesaver because there are times you can't cook. And the studies that they have done over the years say that in an emergency situation, if something happens that's really devastating in your life, it takes 2 to 3 months to be able to adapt to that. I was doing a radio show a few years ago, and I was talking about this on there. It was on Chuck Harder's broadcast, and we had a man from the Midwest call in, and he said, I just want to say something about what you just said. He said, my wife was in the hospital, and he said, it was so stressful to me that it was literally all I could do to boil water during that time. If you are under stress, you're not going to be able to take the time and effort to do a lot of the things that you otherwise would. Now, I was just going to tell you something important, and it just slipped my mind. One of the hardest things to do, it's so easy to do your breads and all of those types of things in your food storage. The thing that does get the hardest is doing your main dishes. If you have to cook with grains and beans every single meal, you can get really sick of it, and really fast you're trying to come up with something that's a little bit different. With children, it is really important that you're able to address this. So that's one of the reasons you want that variety in there. But that's where some of these meals, these freeze-dried meals, become so incredibly valuable because you're not having to come up with something different. It's something you're used to eating. It's something that, doesn't require the work. One of the things that I'd really suggest is whatever you have stored, make sure you use it. You have got to learn how to cook with it because under stress is not the time to learn how to do things. And not just with your food, with anything that you have stored that you're going to be using, learn how it works. When my husband and I first moved to Manti, we moved into this 100-year-old home, and it was really neat. But I at that time, I was doing all kinds of stuff, experimenting with my preparedness. And we had a wood-burning stove, and I thought, I'm going to heat all winter long using the wood-burning stove. I'm not going to turn on the heat because I wanted to learn how to do it, and I wanted to see how long it was going to take to use up my reserves. I thought that having about 5 cords of wood or something would do me for an entire year. I was in for a big shock. I had used it up within about 2 months easily. But the funny thing was, we had gone to California. My husband's from California. We'd gone down for Christmas, and we went to his parents' lovely home, spent the time there, and we drove home in a blizzard, literally. We arrived in Manti, walked in, and he and my kids promptly went to bed. The house was freezing cold because we'd been gone for a week. No heat had been in there, and it was 1 o'clock at night. So I went and I tried to start the stove, light the fire, and I was so cold. And I burned a hole in my carpet that night. I was so frustrated, and I thought it would be so easy to go over and just flip on that heat. But I didn't do it, and I'm so glad that I didn't because it's so valuable. You've got to get used to doing some of this stuff. Under stress, it's not the time. So, one of the things I really would recommend, one of the most valuable things you will get your hands on, is a good food storage cookbook. There wasn't a good one out there till this came along. It's been the #1 selling one since it came out. But go into it and start cooking the stuff you've stored. Learn how to do it. Get your family used to eating it because they're not going to switch from eating the way most people eat right now to eating this way overnight without some physical and emotional problems. Yes, it's the Cookin with Home Storage. Yeah. There's a couple of other books I want to, let me tell you something too. Go through it and look at the ingredients in there. You'll identify things that you need to store that are just really important that you just plain haven't thought of. Go through it and do it. There's a couple of other books I want to suggest. Again, I do this not because I'm just trying to help you figure out what will be really valuable to you. This country bean book I would really, really recommend because we all store beans, but they do get hard. They lose an enzyme and they get hard, and most people throw them away. They still have the nutrition in them, and you can grind them into bean flour. You can make bean soup, refried beans, all kinds of things within 5 minutes. Doing that, you don't need to throw those away, but you do need to know what to do with them, and it's the only book that I know of that has bean flour recipes in it. You can add bean flour to anything and really increase the nutrition. This is another book that I really like, particularly for one reason. Most of us store a lot of wheat, but I don't know how many of you, probably quite a few of you, have tried making gluten. You can do the most incredible stuff with your wheat, making all of this imitation meat that if you flavor it right and things, you'd never know that it wasn't real meat. I mean, it's really, really good stuff. She's got the best, easiest, most simple recipe for that in this book. And that's one of the main reasons I really like this one. While I'm talking about books, I just want to mention a couple of others. Of course, that Band-Aids to Self-Sufficiency is going to be a very, very valuable one. This book is one that everybody ought to have. This, you should read it and put it with your emergency supplies. It tells you how to it's called The Sense of Survival, how to make makeshift shelters, how to find and purify water, how to deal with all of these disasters. You name it, it is in this book. It took him 3 years to compile that book, and I have had so many survivalists and career military people tell me that is the best one they've ever seen on it. This is another one that people find extremely valuable to have where there is no doctor. It was written in for third world countries where they send people like, what are they called? What? No, well, I'm sure they are used in the refugee camps. I'm sure that they are. oh, I can't think of what they're called, where they send them out to go help the people over there. But anyway, they'll give them to them because they don't have a lot of medical help. And I've had a lot of doctors come and buy this book just to bone up. It's very, very good for helping you identify what's going on and know how to treat different things. One of the things that I got into years ago was trying to find some alternative ways in case there weren't doctors. And so I started to get into essential oils and herbs and a lot of different things that I'm so glad that I did, because it's such a wonderful way to treat yourself in a much more natural way. And there's a lot of stuff that you can do to be a lot more self-sufficient. That Rife machine that I've got over there, I won't talk about that because we don't have time, but boy, that is a great addition. One thing I am going to mention really quickly, though, is those of you that do use essential oils, because I know a lot of people do, if you take them internally, which I do quite a few, you know that it begins to dissolve the capsules if they're in there for very long. This Rise Plus is wonderful. It's chock full of nutrition. You can put this in the capsule and then add your essential oils to it, and they'll store much longer, and it's much easier to digest them, to get them in your stomach. One of the things that happens as people store their food, the nutrition begins to go down. It just does. No matter what it is you're storing, it will. And if we have time, I want to talk just a little bit about the shelf life of things and let you ask some questions. There's a lot of stuff we can do. But one of the things you've got to make sure you do is that you have good nutrition. That's where sprouting comes in very, very handy. You know, the pioneers, when they came across the plains, did you know a lot of them got scurvy? We think of that on ships and things, but the pioneers did because they didn't have fresh foods. Children are extremely susceptible to malnutrition. They do not store body reserves like we do, adults do. So from day one, you've got to be very careful that they are getting good nutrition, because that can be very, very serious. Make sure that you store a really good multivitamin and mineral and amino acid supplement. You're not going to get any that store for more than 2 years if it's a good one, but very, very, very important that you have it in there. That's the best one that I have found, the Easy Pack. It's absolutely excellent. But, okay, let's talk for just a minute about, you want to make sure that you get a good storage program. A lot of companies sell the 1-year supplies. Those are a good way to begin. Yeah, they're expensive, she's saying. Some of them are fairly reasonable. It's a good way to start out. Gives you a good, well-rounded way to do it. But I've never seen one that had everything in it that I felt ought to go in one. So it's a good place to begin, but go through the list that I've given you and go through the book and look at the things that you would find really beneficial to have in there. Look at the way your family eats now. You don't want to store a lot of stuff that they're not going to want to eat later. Get them used to eating it and get used to fixing it. What time is it? 25 to? Oh, well then we've got time to go through quite a bit more stuff. Okay. All right. I'm just going to go over this for just a minute. The salt, all of these things. Make sure, one of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is they will decide that they'll go out and they're going to buy all of their wheat, and then they'll go buy all of another item, then another. Don't do it that way. Listen, things are looking very serious right now. I'm sure you'd all agree with me. We look at the economy. We know we're going to be going into real inflation. We can't help but do that. When we see what's happening with the dollar, when we see what's happening all over, this is a good hedge. But don't go out and just buy all of one item or all of two. One of the things that I didn't talk about is some of the problems that people run into. One of the things is something that's called appetite fatigue, and that's where if you eat the same thing over and over again, you can get so sick of it, you don't want to touch it. I don't care how hungry you are. Children, very susceptible to that. Older people, very susceptible to that. That's where you need the variety. So don't just get one or two things. Go through this, get a little bit from each of these categories, and then go back and start again. If you're on a really tight budget and you're just getting going, you're going to want to go, like I say, heavy in the grains and beans, because you can get a ton of food for very little money. But you've got to have the grain mill. You've got to have the spices. You've got to have the flavorings and the baking powder, baking soda, and yeast to be able to do anything with them. So make sure you do that. One of the things that I recommend is if you eat canned foods, which most of us do, make sure you have some on hand. That's not how you want to do most of your long-term storage, because they have about a 2-year shelf life, most of them. Some you can store a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. But if you eat it, you should have it and rotate them. When we talk about tomato products, that's a very good thing to have if you want to bottle them out of your own garden, if you want to buy some canned ones, get some dehydrated. It's good to have a variety of all of that in your storage. One of the other problems that people are going to run into is a lot of people are going to find out they're allergic to wheat that don't have any idea that they are right now. And you don't want to discover that when it's too late to have stored something else. That's why I do the variety of other things, so that you've got other stuff you can fall back on. As far as oil goes, that is one of the absolute vital things you've got to get into your storage. Do you know, during and after World War II in Europe, people who had oil could barter for almost anything? You've got to have it. You need it to cook. You need it for the calories. So olive oil is probably the best way, the best thing to store. Well, the very best would be your cold-pressed oil, but that's extremely expensive, and most people can't afford really to do that. So olive oil is very good. It stores for quite a while, and it's got good nutrition. If you're like me, I used to cook with my food storage all the time, almost every meal. For quite a long time. Y2K came along, and I got so incredibly busy with my business that I stopped doing it as much, and I haven't gotten back as much as I would like. But I don't rotate through things as well as I should. Sometimes I just have to look at it as it is like insurance. But I will tell you, you guys, with what we are looking at right now, it is just very prudent for people to do what they can do and do it. You know, I don't want to get too involved up here, but so many of you are shaking your heads. You know the same things I do. You're hearing the same things I am. And it's just so important that you do it and make sure you've done a good program. Again, it's not just about food and water. Make sure you go through something like this and see what else is as vital, absolutely as vital as your food and water. Okay, now on here it says baby formula and food. You know, a lot of women think that they would just nurse their babies if they were in that situation, but under stress, your milk is gone. It really is. I know. We moved from Alpine to, well, no, Farmington to Alpine when I had a baby that was 6 months old. It didn't seem all that stressful to me, but my milk was gone, totally gone. Lots of pioneer babies, same problems. Make sure if you have a child or grandchild or something, keep some formula on hand, even if you aren't using it right now, just to be safe. If you get caught, there is a recipe in here for making emergency baby formula and baby food. It would be better to have something from the store with more nutrition in it, but that is in there, and it can be very, very life-saving. So then one of the things you want to make sure you do, two things really, really, really important. Even if you're on a tight budget, make sure you do this. And that is what I have down here is your quick and easy to prepare foods. We've talked about that. But also what I call the psychological foods. Those are the goodies. Those are the things that are going to make all the difference in the world in making things seem more normal. Yeah, I see people smiling. Yeah, those are the things you don't mind storing. But, you know, I have talked to, I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on preparedness, and a lot of people who've had to store foods and use it and eat it. And I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, do you know that, I've had a lot of them come up and say, that was what made it absolutely livable. I would store 100 times more now than what I originally had when I had to fall back on my food storage to do it. So I've got suggestions written down there. Again, it's also in the back of the cookbook for anybody who is listening on tape. All this information is in the back of the Cookin' with Home Storage cookbook. At least this one, the deluxe edition. So you want to make sure that you do all that. How long does this stuff store? I've known people that have stored stuff for 25, 30 years. It's still edible. I'm not sure how much nutrition there still is in some of their dehydrated fruits and vegetables. But what goes the fastest are your canned goods. Then in your dehydrated foods, anything that has a lot of oil in it, such as your dairy products, TVP, that type of thing, that you will generally have a 7 to 10 year shelf life on. Your fruits and vegetables will store longer. The thing that's going to make the biggest difference in the shelf life of your food is how is it stored. Number one, temperature. You want to keep it as cool as you can, not freezing, but keep it cool and try and keep it an even temperature. That's not always easy to do because a lot of people live in apartments. A lot of people don't have basements or something, and they have to put it outside. That's not the preferable way because hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold is murder on your food storage, but sometimes you don't have a choice. So keep it cool, keep it dry, keep it out of the sunlight, and keep it out of air. Okay, how do you store the foods? One of the best way to save money is to buy bulk and do some things yourself. Now, my favorite way to store things are in the number 10 cans. If you can go down to an LDS church cannery or something, you can pick up a lot of those things really, really inexpensively. That's a good way to do it. If you want to do it yourself, I used to hate those those 5-gallon plastic buckets because I just saw way too many problems with those. In an earthquake, if they fall over, they split open. If they get a hard enough impact. Sometimes the lids pop off. You get the stuff that leaches out of the plastic into the food. But if you want to use them, I have discovered there are 2 things that you can do that make them very usable. And that is make sure you put a food grade liner in there. They're very hard to get, to find. I do have them. I don't have them in my booth, but I do have them, and they're not that expensive. The other thing is you can do the Mylar lining in them. They both have pros and cons. The Mylar's better for not letting it breathe as much, but you can get creases in it, and they're a lot harder to work with, and they're more expensive. So I generally use the plastic liners. Do not, I repeat, do not use garbage can liners. So many people think, I'll use the garbage can liners. But you're going to be introducing all kinds of stuff to your food. Don't do it. So, okay. Oh, yes. What? Yes. What is rodent and bug resistant? Okay. One of the plastic buckets can be a problem if now in an emergency, a lot of times you have problems with rodents. Big problems, and they can smell right through that a lot of times and chew their way through. That's why it's good again to have that extra liner in there. They are fairly good. The number 10 cans are very good that way. As far as bug proof, again, keep it out of the moisture and keep it cool. If you're going to do your own, you probably want to put those little oxygen absorber packets in there. Let me give you a tip on where you can find those really inexpensively. At the LDS distribution center, they have there's 100 in a bag. I don't know how much they are, but I know they're very inexpensive. How much? Yeah, $8. That's what I was thinking too. And what you do if you're using those, you want to use 1 per gallon. So if you've got a 5-gallon bucket, you're going to use 5 of them. The tip for that, though, is if you're doing that, what I've always done is I've gotten my buckets ready, gotten the liners in it, and then I have a couple of people help me. One pours whatever in while somebody drops the packets in, and somebody else holds the bag closed. Because if you are exposing those to the air, what do? They absorb the oxygen. And so within 20 minutes, they've reached their capacity and they're not working anymore. So you need to keep them closed up. No, anything that you're wanting to sprout, you don't want to do that with. No, anything that you're going to sprout, you don't, because that will cut down its germination. Yeah, if you're doing sprouts, don't do it at all. But even if you want to do some of your grains and beans to sprout, don't do it either. As far as your freeze-dried foods, generally your dehydrated foods keep about 80% of the nutrition. Your freeze-dried keep, what is it, 90-some%, I think it is. And again, you just add water. They're very, very good. They taste like fresh. They generally don't have as long of a shelf life if you're getting a really good one. Now, some companies out there I have heard claim 50-year shelf lives. Well, I would be very, very suspicious of that if that is the case. But again, most of this stuff is going to store at a good 7 to 10 years, some of it beyond that. If you have a question, open it up. If it smells rancid, you know you have a problem. And it's not a real good idea. I mean, if people were really, really, really hungry, I'm sure they would eat it. But it's not a good idea because it can be carcinogenic and things to be eating a lot of that. Does anybody have questions before we have to end on it? No? Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes. He was asking about essential oils, the oil of oregano. A lot of people love it because it is so good at killing bacteria and things. If you get sick, it's an excellent, excellent one. It is kind of hard on your, it's kind of a very potent one. And that's where I really like using some of that in a capsule if I'm going to take it because it's not as hard on your stomach. One thing about oregano, though, is you can only take oregano for up to 2 weeks, and then you've got to go off it for at least 2 weeks, or it begins to impact your liver. I prefer taking time. It does the exact same thing, but it doesn't impact the liver in the same way that oil of oregano does. But that's a great one to have on hand. There are several that you know, when I first got into essential oils, I spent a couple of $1,000s buying all. I went through the books and I picked out all the things that I thought had the properties that I wanted. But I found people are different. Different people respond to different oils. And I found the ones that were my favorites. And those, even though I've got lots of oil sitting there, I come back time and time and time again to 5 minutes, okay, to the same basic ones. Some of the really, really, really good ones, I love eucalyptus because it is just wonderful if you're having respiratory problems. Now, the ones that I carry may have a little different names than some that you may use, but Spice Traders is just an absolutely wonderful one if you're sick. Peppermint oil is an excellent, excellent one for a lot of different things. Lemon is a very, very good one. Helichrysum is an absolutely excellent one. It's a more expensive one. Well, there's a lot that I'd have to go through there, but you'll get your favorites. Pardon? How long do they last? Most of them will last years and years and years and years. There are 2 exceptions. Your citrus oils don't. They get thicker. And so they don't store quite as long. You want to use those up a little bit quicker, maybe. And then when you get blends, Most of the biggest percentage of the blends, no matter what company and no matter how pure of oils the company carries, when they do their blends, some of them do require carrier oils, and so those don't store quite as long either. But they store for years. And it's a great, and herbs too. Great, great, great thing to have on hand. And learn to use them. Fish antibiotics. I don't know anything about that. Fish antibiotics instead of, oh, if anybody wants to know, yeah. I really don't know. I know that I know that there are people that sometimes even get some from veterinary supply areas for the same reason. Yes, I don't know. I don't want to touch that one. I mean, I don't want to try to address that here. But I was given the 5-minute signal a few minutes ago, so I'll end. If anybody wants to ask me any questions, by all means, come over to the booth. I'll be there for the next 2 days. If you want this handout, you're welcome to it. Oh, one other thing, let me mention really quickly. This is the Medical Core Potassium Iodate. This is the best you get. This is for thyroid block for nuclear. 90 capsules for $14. Excellent, excellent buy. They're all brand new, fresh. If they're not open, they'll store for up to 10 years. Okay, in spite of what the thing is. If they're not open, they're good for 10 years. So I know a lot, I mention it because over in my booth, I have it over there. A lot of people are looking for it. They have a hard time finding it, so I want to mention it. And a lot of times, some of the companies will sell 14 of them for, what, $15, something like that. And this is the top quality for a fraction. Okay,